Hello everyone, I am here to show you how I designed this landscape quilt all by myself. Um, this is all secondhand fabric too. I'm really proud of it. This is in the process of being hand quilted. So at the time of this filming, recording this video, I had just had to leave grad school because I lost funding for my research, which meant that I lost my apartment, which meant that I had to find a job in the city that was really expensive. And I was just kind of worried. I didn't know what was going to happen. Just everything was not going well for me. But I just needed some reminders, and I took some inspiration, and the inspiration comes from Luke 12:27. It says, "Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." And it just reminded me that the lilies don't have to work for their clothing, and yet they are beautifully dressed every day by our Creator. And what more am I than his daughter? He will provide for me. And you know what? I'm sitting in my current apartment, my new apartment. I just came home from my new job. I'm editing this video on a new laptop that I was able to buy. So he really does provide. And I'm glad that I get to make this art to honor his creation. So let's get into it. So I designed this quilt on Procreate on my iPad, and I first started with a rectangle, which is about the size I wanted my quilt to be. And then I drew this picture. I've never drawn a picture before. I don't draw, I don't color, so this was a big deal for me that I drew this. And I just still can't believe it. So I went on Etsy and I got these applique patches that are lilies, like I showed in the beginning. And that's what I wanted this focus of this quilt to be, how beautiful these lilies are, and they are just provided for. So I took in Procreate, I just took the lilies so that I could layer it on top of my drawing by adding layers. And so I thought I ordered four on Etsy, and I said, what if I spread them out? And so that's kind of where the basis of my sizing came from. So I know that these Etsy applique patches are 24 centimeters high, and I wanted the lilies to be no more than 40% of the total height of my quilt. And so, if I had four in a row, I was able to determine how wide the quilt needed to be because the fabric patches are 15 centimeters wide each. So I did the math and I added a few centimeters for spacing and converted to inches. And I realized that the quilt width should be about 29 inches wide. And then I was able to do some more math to determine how long the quilt needed to be. And I did this in centimeters because I didn't want to change to inches, but I ended up having to anyway. So the total length of my quilt ended up being 31.5 inches, which is pretty cool. So then I separated each section according to its size. And here I just kind of guesstimated and gave everyone the space that I thought that they needed, and it all kind of lined up. And it's not really exact because this is just the drawing, but that's what I ended up with. And the mountains I decided would be 7 inches high, and the sun would be 7 inches high. And so that's how I determined the sizing for this quilt. I am choosing fabrics for this quilt. I bought a ginormous stash from Facebook Marketplace. It was someone's stash. They were not going to sew anymore and they bought these beautiful fabrics and I said, I will take them. And so I've been trying to just use them up. And this is one of the projects that I am doing with those fabrics. So you can just see me choose. And if I bring up my photo again, I need multiple different greens and I need multiple different blues. I need two browns and a yellow. And I'm just kind of picking out what I don't really like, kind of laid out all my options. And the yellow is a good sun. I think I have enough yellow for that sun. There's my photo again that I'm going off of. I laid out some batting that I had. My little kitty found a bed on it. And I am marking this batting to 29 inches wide with a little bit of overhang on each side. And I'm just going to frame the batting with Sharpie to kind of imitate my iPad picture on the batting. And I'm just making the rectangle frame. I decided to make it 36 inches high because I wanted more of a rectangle than a square. And I would just add more sky. So my lilies would be like 37% of the height. And I'm just using a straight edge to make a right angle and nicely frame out my quilt. And that looks like my picture. I'm pretty proud of myself so far. And so all I did was I um, repeated the measurements that I had made on my iPad and I put them on the batting so I had reference points to where I wanted to start and end the different fabrics. And here I am just laying out the different fabrics to make sure that it's wide enough to cover the whole quilt. So this top fabric is, and I just laid the edges on the markings on the side. And this blue fabric is not wide enough to cover, so I had to piece that separately. And to piece it, I just cut it down the middle and sewed right sides together so that I made a more narrow but longer piece of fabric. And there's that seam right there. And I just laid it on top of the light blue fabric. And yeah, thumbs up. Okay, so this fabric, this dark blue fabric, and these two browns, those are going to be the mountains. And if you've ever paper pieced before, you'll know how to do this. This is not a tutorial, by the way. If you know how to quilt, you can probably follow along. If you've done paper piecing before, you can probably do this. So I'm just doing the same thing with this blue river fabric. I'm cutting it in half and then sewing it together so that it covers the whole batting. And now I'm ironing my green, and I just was met with that. Fortunately, it wiped right off, but that gave me a little heart attack. And so I finished piecing all of my fabrics that I wanted in the background, and I ironed the seam flat. Now, I apologize in advance for this next part of the tutorial. It's going to be the worst part of the tutorial because I'm not even sure if I did this right. But what I want is I want a river, and I want the river to have a natural curve meeting the green and the blue fabrics. And I saw one video on YouTube almost 2 years ago, and I didn't watch the tutorial, and I thought, yeah, I can do it, no problem. So I pinned the two fabrics together, and I took my favorite quilting hack are these Crayola washable markers, and I drew my river line that I wanted the stitch line to follow. And then I overlapped the fabrics and I cut on my river line. So I used a black marker, if you can see that I have a curve to the river on the top grass and on the lower grass. So I'm gonna have to do this for the top and the bottom of the river. And I want the river to be 2.5 inches wide. So I measure 2.5 inches from the highest and the lowest parts of the river. Luckily, I have this cool little 2.5 inch ruler that I could use, and it made this a little easier. But I am being a little bit precise with this, but not too precise. I laid my fabrics one on top of each other, and I am cutting on my drawn curve with scissors. I'm cutting both fabrics at the same time. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me two curves of like the same shape but different fabrics. So I pull that top blue part down on the right and I discard that as scrap. And now I can sew the right green fabric with the river blue fabric. And they should line up. So I'm actually going to do the same thing with the other side, except I forgot here that I needed to do a different fabric for the river. So here I am putting them right sides together. I'm not sure if this was correct because it didn't turn out too great. It turned out fine, but it's a little wrinkly. So this is what it looks like when I have all the river cut out with my curves, and I guess to make it easier on myself, I did solid green on the top and the bottom. And so now I'm going to sew these right sides together, doing my best to do a 1/4 inch seam. What I didn't do was I did not clip this the corners. I didn't clip the seams. Maybe that would have made it spread out a little flatter. But I got my buddy here next to me and I'm doing my best to sew these curves. I've never sewed a curve before in my life and this is my first one. So bear with me. Like I said, this part is not the tutorial. But it turned out okay. You just sew two fabrics together, close your eyes, and it'll turn out no problem. You got nothing to worry about if you're trying to sew anything. And it turned out a little bit wrinkly, I'll do say, but that's okay. Quilts are supposed to be wrinkly, and rivers are supposed to have waves in them, right? So I guess I did decide to do the separate green fabric on the bottom, except this time I'm not going to cut. I'm just going to sew along the curve and then I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch seam allowance because I just wanted to see how it would turn out. And I think that if I would have clipped the curves in a little bit, it would have turned out a little bit more flat. But I still will say that it turned out pretty good. Yeah, so this part of the quilt is not the best, but that's all right. You don't need to mention the wrinkles. I love the wrinkles for what they are. And now I'm just going to complete the bottom half of the quilt top. So I'm going to be adding my greens. I have two more greens to add, and those curves were just way too much work. So I'm kind of just doing a wonky line. It's not straight across because I have different amounts of greens on each side, and that goes back to my original design. But I have now completed the bottom half of the quilt and I am ironing it to see how how bad it is. But it's not too bad. That looks like a river. No problem. And then once I quilt it and once I wash it, those wrinkles will be part of the quilt forever. No problem. Alright, so that is the bottom half of the quilt, and now I need to do the mountains. And now this is going to be a little difficult. The mountains, I have the two skies on top, and then those yellow fabrics are for the sun. You know, actually, once it's ironed, it looks pretty good. I don't want anyone to feel like they can't be a quilter. Look at that. I've never done anything like this before in my entire life. And I was able to do this. I just still can't believe it. All right, so this brown floral fabric is going to be my large mountain in the background, and I'm just folding it in half to get the halfway mark, and I just use my finger to press a little line right in the middle. And then I can open it back up and use my Crayola marker to mark the middle. And then I go up to the very top middle and I put a dot about an inch from the bottom to allow for seam allowance, so I still get the top peak of the mountain. And then I used a straight edge and I connected the line from 1 inch from the top, or 1 inch from the bottom of the quilt to the top of the mountain. And so the lines that I drew, that's going to be my stitching line for the sky with its own mountain. And that is going to be, I did it similar to how you would paper piece. So I just need to trim off that seam allowance and that excess material, that corner, but I will show you how I did it for this side. So I took my background fabric and my mountain fabric and I kind of laid it where I want it to look. So what I need to do is I need to sew along that left edge, and I'm going to put right sides together. So I'm going to lift over the fabric and mirror it, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch from the edge of the brown. And then when you pull the fabric over and you can iron it, then you can trim away the excess fabric. This is called paper piecing, and it's a technique in quilting that there are many tutorials out there. Maybe I will do my own someday, but this is not the video for a paper piecing tutorial. So now I can fold it over and there is my mountain. And so then I cut the seam allowance to a 1/4 inch. And now I want to do the same for the other side. So I just flipped over and mirrored the top piece of fabric, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch on top of there. And that's how I did it. So that is not the best tutorial. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Now I'm just going to cut a 1/4 inch seam allowance and take away that excess fabric so it's not too bulky. And then I just attached it with a straight stitch to the quilt top, right sides together. And here's how it turned out. I just can't believe it, honestly, that my 4 years of quilting, I've developed the skills to now design my own quilt. So that's awesome. I added the top two sky fabrics and pet my little boy. And now we're ready to add the sun. So to add the sun, I used fusible web for applique. And I used my trusty Crayola markers in a bowl for the sun. And yeah, the bowl is a good size for the sun, I think. So I'm going to trace my bowl with a pencil or a pen onto my fusible web, and I make sure to do that on the paper side. So I draw on the paper side, and then I iron the fusible web onto the fabric. And I'm just ironing around for about 15 seconds until it is fused. And then I'm going to take some sharp scissors, but not my trusty fabric scissors. And I'm going to cut out the circular shape on both of the fabrics and the fusible web. So now I can peel back the paper layer to reveal the shiny fusible web on the wrong side of my sun fabric. And then I iron it onto my quilt, and I just hold it on a little bit. And then I'm going to sew it with a zigzag stitch. So I chose this cream thread. I'm going to do a zigzag stitch on my normal machine. So I'm going to put a piece of printer paper behind the sun to give it some stabilization. Unless you had an embroidery machine, that would be a little bit different. And I'm going to do a zigzag stitch. I just pinned the paper to the fabric. And I'm sorry, this is before I ever got a tripod, so I'm trying to hold the camera, but I'm doing a zigzag so that it covers both the background fabric and the sun. And I did that all the way around, tore off the paper, and I am laying my backing fabric that I ironed down on my table, and I smoothed it out flat. I laid my batting on top, and finally I laid my quilt top on top of that, and I safety pin basted this quilt. But I am really proud about how it turned out. I still need to add the lilies and quilt it. I am about 60% of the way done hand quilting it, as you can see. I don't know if I'm even going to add the lilies. I think this landscape is beautiful by itself, but we'll see how I feel. I haven't worked on it since I stopped working on it a few months ago, so we'll see. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.